that were turned in Friday night before the election on Tuesday. And like our biggest counties, Democrat-controlled counties, they hire a firm that usually it's got Soros money or big Democrat money behind it, and they're trained on how to pull all this off. And so the guy in charge of that firm got all those flash drives on Friday night, and he had 3 days to play with them, and it certainly appeared that he did. Enough to get a warrant, grab all of that stuff. Well, Paxton kept saying he was on it, you know, we're after it, but he never did anything about the big fraud. He assigned a couple of guys, maybe 5 at one time out of his 750 lawyers to investigate some. They indicted little things like people voting for somebody that didn't know they voted for them. But he didn't go after the stuff that really threw the elections, that could throw an election. And so that was very disturbing because we knew after 2 years, all of that evidence would be totally destroyed. You'd never be able to go back and recreate that case. And I felt like, you know, I voted for Paxton in 2014. I voted for him in November 2018. And I'm thinking, he has a chance to be a national hero because we show this fraud in Texas, then that alerts Georgia and Pennsylvania, all these other swing states. Here is where they're going to try to steal the 2020 election. And he would be a national hero. I was great with that. I thought that's terrific. And I'll do my fighting in Congress. But then over 2 years, he didn't go after the big stuff. And in 2020, there was evidence right here in Harris County of election fraud. And a bunch of people tried to get him involved to come in and file suit to stop stuff. And he wouldn't do it. There were individuals that filed suit, but we needed the Attorney General to come in. And he didn't do any of that. And that was very disturbing. Especially, even though Trump won Texas, there are those who say that actually they were prepared to steal Texas for Biden. But it was such an overwhelming number of votes came in so fast, they didn't have time to bring in all these votes from trunks and things. In fact, supposedly word went out to other states, you gotta slow this down or Trump's gonna win Pennsylvania, Georgia like he did Texas. And apparently they had planned that no one, including Trump, could get more votes than Obama did in 2008. That was, at the time, the biggest vote turnout. So they felt like if we got enough to beat Trump getting the number of votes Obama did, we got way more than we need. Turns out he went way past what, legitimately went way past what Obama got first time. So they were overwhelmed in Texas, but nobody had really gone after the fraud. And I get sick and tired of people saying there's absolutely no evidence of fraud anywhere. No, there was no evidentiary hearing where people were allowed to bring the evidence of fraud, but there were thousands of affidavits setting out fraud that was observed. Well, sworn testimony is evidence. And people don't want to face up to that. Now in Arizona, what made headlines was, well, they did an audit and Biden got 100 more votes than they thought. They didn't even bring up all the 100,000 plus votes that shouldn't have been, but there was so much that is coming out in Arizona now about the fraud there. And in Pennsylvania, and in Georgia. Now in Pennsylvania, like Trump said at the rally at Conroe, because the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has said you could not mail out, those are not legitimate mail-in ballots, then actually, if he had gotten that decision before January 6th, he would have gotten all of Pennsylvania's all of their electoral votes. But he didn't, so he's not president today. But anyway, all of those were really causing a struggle for me. And then what also occurred in the fall of 2020, I knew of his top people in the AG's office. They have great reputations, especially his #1 assistant, Jeff Mateer. He worked in the AG's office previously, and he'd gone to work for Kelly Shackelford, First Liberty, helping Christian groups and stuff. He's a brilliant lawyer. Ted Cruz had said years ago, he's the most honest, smart attorney I know. Well, now that says something when it comes from Ted. That's Jeff Mateer. Well, I talked to Jeff, but in the fall of 2020, his 7 top people, lawyers, all signed a letter to the FBI saying, our boss has been engaged in bribery, corruption, abuse of office, and he needs to be investigated and prosecuted, and here's the facts. And Paxton last summer had some people in the AG's office that he assigned to give us a report, and they said, oh, there's nothing there in that report. So he's telling people he's been exonerated. But, and some of y'all, maybe all of y'all are aware, the Department of Justice is a little bit partisan, and that did not change under Trump. There were still bad people at the top, and they love nothing better than to go after a Republican. And just imagine the Department of Justice giving evidence from 7 strong Republicans who are people of integrity, saying the Attorney General of Texas has been committing crimes and needs to be prosecuted. Well, you know they had to be giddy. Well, I felt like they should have come back with an indictment within a year. But it's become clear, and people that have looked into it say, those rascals at the DOJ are gonna wait till after the primary, then indicting, and then all the media that's kept quiet about the allegations, they'll bring them all up, and Paxton won't be able to get elected. Look, we got our 4 biggest counties, which are the 4 biggest threats to cheat in the 2022-2024 election. And if we don't have an attorney general with the authority and the willingness to go stop the fraud, then we're gonna lose this state. And that's what I arrived at looking at 2024. Now, Paxton's making a big deal that in December, the Court of Criminal Appeals said the Attorney General's office can't prosecute election fraud. Well, they did say that. And you gotta know, I mean, I've been a judge and then was Chief Justice of the Court of Appeals. Some of those are the least qualified people in the state. The Supreme Court spends money running for their office, but not much money gets spent in the Court of Criminal Appeals. And so it's often a Democrat, not often, but many times it's a Democrat that's just run and got elected. They do criminal defense work, and people think they had a good name, so they vote for a good name. Well, a couple of things need to happen in the Court of Criminal Appeals. There has been a motion for rehearing filed asking them to change their decision. Hopefully they will. A lot of us are sending in briefs saying you can't do this. The AG has to be able to do it, and besides that, it's the law. And the Texas Constitution allows the legislature to say the responsibilities of the AG, and they did, and election fraud is one of them. It's in. So even if they change their decision, we still need some things fixed in our legislation. and I've been talking to some of our legislators, for example, I'm advocating we need a criminal statute regarding organized crime so that Attorney General can impanel a grand jury and indict and prosecute organized crime wherever it's found. No, we don't have that. Yeah, it is kind of surprising, but we don't have that. So it would be along the lines of federal RICO, but it's got to give the Attorney General power to go get it. We got drug cartels that are setting up, and I keep hearing, and it's shocking to me that the human trafficking, sex trafficking, the Houston may be the headquarters.
Yeah.
Man, as horrendous as that is, when you, as a felony judge, you see what that stuff does to lives. You'd have to have no compassion whatsoever not to want to do everything you could to stop it. But the AG doesn't have the tools needed. And organized crime, if there are organized criminals that are stealing elections, we need to know that too. And anyway, I don't know where you're gonna play the filming of this, but I'm not saying anything I hadn't said before, but anyway, so those cause concerns, but when the realization hit that in all likelihood he's gonna be indicted after the primary, I still was able to dismiss that for a while and go, well, and I heard some people say, well, you know what, if he gets indicted after the primary, then we'll just vote in a replacement. Like happened with John Ratcliffe when he was nominated by Trump to be the Director of National Intelligence. Well, I finally actually looked at the statute, the Texas Election Code 145.036, and it makes clear being indicted after a primary does not allow you to replace the person. And in fact, brought back to mind, Tom DeLay got indicted after he won a primary, and Tom was a team player, and he resigned and encouraged replacing him on the ballot. The Democrats sued, and the court said, Texas law is very clear. The only way you can replace somebody on the ballot is if they're diagnosed with a terminal condition after the primary that they didn't know about beforehand, or if, like Radcliffe, they accept another position elsewhere, then they can be replaced. An indictment, no, you're stuck with them. You can withdraw their name from the ballot, but you can't replace them.
Wow.
Now, in talking to folks that were working at the AG's office, that are not now, they're thinking that his thinking is, well, because if you go back a year and a half ago, the stories were that he may well resign, and what a lot of us were hearing is that Abbott's trying to figure out who he will appoint to replace Paxton when he resigns. Well, he didn't, not only did he not resign, he doubled down, filed for re-election, and some of his former employees think that that's so that after he's indicted, if he's won the primary, he's got something to negotiate with. Okay, I won't campaign and let the Democrat win if you'll recommend no jail time for me for these, and we can work out an agreement. I don't know if he's doing that, but that would be leverage he could use to negotiate. So in an interview this morning, this afternoon earlier with WFAA, they said, well, what would you say is the chief difference between you and Paxton? Because you both seem to draw conservative voters. I said, I think the main difference is I'm willing to risk any political future I might ever have to try to save Texas so we can save our country.
Yes.
And he's willing to risk losing Texas and the country to try to save himself. too much at risk. And you can look up the allegations, but it's a story as old as the Bible, you know. There's nothing illegal about an affair, but then she got fired because she was working for a state senator who was a colleague of the Attorney General's wife, who's a state senator, and she was thinking, I can't be employing somebody that's messing with the husband of my friend and colleague. She lets her go. Allegation when she called and said, hey, I got fired because my relationship with you. I need a job and I want to make $100 grand a year. So he called a big developer donor in Austin. He gives her a job for $100 grand a year. And then he starts needing favors because he's got the DOJ after him. He's got creditors that are trying to foreclose on land he wants to develop. And he got the AG's office to come in and help. And there's a lot of allegations about the different back and forth that were used that his staff believed were corruption, bribery, and abuse of office. So those are things that I am sure will be hammered once the primary is over. It looks like there should be a runoff and it should be me and him, but that's why he's spending $1 million coming after me, saying I'm not a conservative, I missed important votes. We have thousands and thousands of votes. And so often votes like approving the journal, what that means is you approve the transcript of the proceedings the day before. Well, as a judge, I approve transcripts all the time. I never approve one unless I read it and made any changes that the reporter got wrong. So I don't vote for the approving the journal because I hadn't seen it. I'm not voting for it blindly. And there were, a lot of times they will have a vote that most everybody agrees on, so they can get people to the floor. They hold the vote out for a long time so they can get with people and try to get them to change how they're gonna vote on another vote coming up later that day or the next day. You know, that's the whipping process. Well, if I know how I'm gonna vote and I've skipped some of those, it's not gonna affect anything. But anyway, the conservative rating groups like Numbers USA is best on conservative on border issues. Mark Levin's group, Conservative Review, they're great. They analyze the bills. They know who's conservative and who isn't, who's fighting and who isn't. And they know that I've been fighting for conservatives, and I'm one of the top conservatives in the country. So I don't know if all the stuff he's mailing and putting out on me will have an effect, but we've got to get in the runoff, and I think once we're in the runoff, it'll be easier to make the case, and more people will come along and help financially. You know, it's just a very dangerous time. If I don't win, I don't see myself running for anything again, because I think it may doom the 2024 election. And even if we get the House back in 22, it would be nice to be back in the majority and have done that. I was looking forward to that, but the whole country's at risk. Our freedom, this republic, and you can't have 2 million people a year come into the country that don't know the responsibilities of maintaining a republic. And I'll tell you, some of the best citizens we have are people that came from Venezuela or Eastern Europe, and they've seen, and they are really, you know, Rafael Cruz, I was with him a couple of days ago, we're hearing this stuff just like we heard in Cuba. That's what some of the Venezuela, that's exactly before they ruined our country. Well, no republic lasts forever, and ours is. But the thing that I will give my life trying to stop is losing what we have, our freedoms, on our generation's watch. They're not gonna rise up and call us blessed anytime in the future if we don't shore up what's really at risk now. So, and the conversation in reference, talking to a guy, worked with Border Patrol, been in National Guard, about the border issues. And I really have been surprised Paxton hadn't been more involved in that. Abbott has sent troopers, state troopers down, DPS, and he sent National Guard down. But mostly all they're allowed to do is say, that's the Border Patrol right down there, just go that way. The
Why?
US, pardon?
Why can't they stop
And
them
I've
from
had that
coming in?
conversation with the governor. He says all of our lawyers are saying the same thing. When the Supreme Court came out in the Arizona case in 2011, and the Obama administration really wasn't helping us on that. But they said that state and local law enforcement cannot enforce immigration law.
It's invasion.
Oh, pardon?
It's an invasion, it is not.
And that's
immigration.
my contention.
That's right, yeah.
Article 4 of the US Constitution says the federal government guarantees
That's right.
us to be free from invasion.
That's right.
And I've studied history my whole life. I majored in it at A&M and I've never stopped studying history. But it was when Woodrow Wilson was president, just over 100 years ago. Pancho Villa had about 4 dozen of his guys cross into New Mexico. They killed some Americans, and that was an invasion. And they sent General Pershing with the army into northern Mexico to chase them down. They got a bunch of lieutenants. They didn't get Pancho Villa, but that stopped the invasions.
Right.
So somewhere between 48 and 2 million people is an invasion, and we cannot handle that again. And so the problem with the Supreme Court decision is if somebody illegally or legally puts 1 foot on Texas soil, they are now an immigrant, legal or illegal. Many of them will claim asylum and they get a hearing. If they're never, and I know we own half of the river where it forms the border, but if they never put 1 foot on Texas soil, they're not an immigrant. And I think the answer is, you got the troopers down there, you got the National Guard. Don't let anybody set a foot on Texas soil. You repel the invasion. And I think from a legal standpoint, we got a good footing to stand on. It is an invasion, and so we repel the invasion. And then I think we will get into the fact that the drug cartel really is, they are a terrorist organization.
Absolutely.
And they are sending their people in here. And I've spent lots of nights and days on the border. The Border Patrol way back said, you know what they call us? They call us the drug cartel calls us their logistics. And I said, like the commercial? Yeah. They get them across the border, and then the US government ships them anywhere the cartels want them to go. And I've been there in the evening when they got 20, 30, 40 people lined up. They have to go to each one, ask the questions that are on the list. And people are swapping the kid. Here, you want to be this kid's parent? No, you take this kid. Oh, I like your address. And they're switching addresses. They've got a little address where they're going to say they have relatives. It's what the drug cartels gave them because they're either going to go there for sex trafficking, drug trafficking, whatever. And they're sending people all over the country, but the taxpayers are funding it. And you may have seen in the last week, it turns out, even though nobody here could get on a plane without a government photo ID that has a star on it indicating it's okay, then you can get on a plane with an arrest warrant, and that's your identification if you're illegally in the country. That's fine. So we're shipping people all over the place, and I think legally the distinction needs to be, they're not immigrants, we're not letting them on our soil.
Right.
And the drug cartels, they will probably react. They've got lots of equipment. They may want to try to invade with the heavy equipment. but it is an invasion.
invasion.
They're just not having to use all of their military armaments at this point. So that's something that should be done. With regard to election fraud, last summer, there was a request for an attorney general opinion. Now in Texas, you can request an attorney general opinion on a subject, and until and unless appellate court says that's not the law, then the AG opinion is considered to be legally what you follow. So when the Attorney General is asked for an opinion, it is really important. He was asked for an opinion about the Texas Secretary of State, who was giving waivers to counties, Democrat-controlled counties, come to mind, but a waiver that they did not have to comply with state law that requires ballots be paper and be sequentially numbered. They have, under Texas law, they've gotta be sequentially numbered. You wanna fight voter fraud? That is one of the best tools you can have. If they're sequentially numbered, somebody brings in some that number's already been used,
Right.
or it's a number we didn't get to, then there you go, it's
You know
easier
it's
to
a
prove the fraud.
Yeah.
So, under Texas law, if an attorney general opinion is requested, it's supposed to be done in 6 months. Well, his 6 months was up recently, and he issued an attorney general letter saying, this issue is so complicated and complex, we're still researching it. It's requiring a great deal of legal research, and we'll get back with an opinion later. We're just not sure.
So he's just balling paper.
He just
It
kicked the
should
bucket.
not have been a week before that opinion came back and said, no, the Secretary of State is appointed by the governor. He is not entitled to waive the law that's passed by the legislature. But we don't have an opinion. Another one that I was watching before I made a decision to try to run was in, again, last summer, opinion was requested, and the state agency that oversees child abuse said they'll follow whatever the Attorney General says. But the question is sex change operations or puberty blockers done on a child, given to a child, is that child abuse? And it took 4 months for them waiting for the answer. Is it child abuse or not? I know Paul McHugh was the head doctor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins, the first hospital in America that did sex change. And he's made clear, you give puberty blockers to a child, they can make them sterile, they can die early, there are all kinds of problems. That's child abuse. If you cut off functioning body parts of a child, it's child abuse. If they want to do that after they're an adult, that's their call, but to do that to a child is child abuse. And he came out after 4 months saying, well, you know, we've talked about this in the past, I'm sure we'll talk about the future, but it's really hard to determine. And so, anyway, you read the opinion and go, he didn't say it is or it isn't.
Follow the
No
money. I
opinion.
did, there's money there.
Well, and yes,
Follow the money.
George P. Bush had sent, he said, you see this, he had got $260,000 from this group that's involved in sex change, gender reassignment, and that kind of thing. Well, you know, I don't really care so much where my donations come from, but people have found out, like, for example, I love Walmart, I shop at Walmart a lot. They used to be open after midnight, which usually when I could go shopping. But anyway, I think most of the Walton family gave me max donations back when I ran for the first time in '04, and I was sure grateful. And then they came and said, we're glad you're elected, we want a bank, we want a federal bank. We don't wanna have to cut a deal with some other bank to be there, we wanna be a bank. And I said, y'all are so good at retail, you put lots of people out of business. If you do that, if you get that good at banking, you'll put all the other banks out of business. And then people have to come beg you for a loan so they can compete with Walmart. I don't think that's a good idea. I can't support that. So I've never gotten another contribution since. But
Good for
well,
you.
that's, you know, I appreciate help getting elected, but I'm not changing my principles for anybody.
Bravo.
So those are things that have been problematic and that got me to going, I gotta try. I can't get down the road and I didn't even try.
Yeah.
And so the number one question I've gotten is, you know, why would you leave Congress? We really need you there. Well, that was a consideration because there have been times since I've been there that nobody but me stood up and said, Maynard, you're wrong. I don't care if you're speaker or not. This is wrong. This is not what we agreed, and didn't get any support. Well, let me tell you, in November of 2020, it was a sad presidential election, but it was a good congressional election. We were supposed to lose seats and we picked up seats. And we got people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and, Mary Miller. Trump called me from the Oval Office back in January last year before he left. And he said, Louie, I got Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Mary Miller, a whole bunch of these freshmen here. And I said to them, who is your inspiration in Congress? And they all said it was you. I said, well, let's call him and tell him. So anyway, but let me tell you, they are stand-up people. They'll make some mistakes, but it won't be for lack of standing up for what they believe in. And I don't know who's gonna get voted in to replace me, but I know if it's somebody that doesn't stand up when things are tough, they're not gonna get reelected. And I would encourage them not to be reelected if that's the case. So I think we'll be all right there.
Well, I was just gonna ask a question, and I'm just keep thinking, I mean, we're kind of bush country, which drives me
Sure.
crazy. But what, you know, I get the big card today in the mail, and the border patrol, I don't know, I mean, what's going on with that, with him? Because I don't trust, I think
With
he's a
George
journalist,
B?
but, yeah.
I'm not sure. Now, he's saying as land commissioner, he is helping build a wall. And look, I've been a fan of the wall.